I say anything, let me just get you into this mindset of what you're about to learn. I'm gonna give you a few words. You can play the images in your head. Alright, close your eyes. Ready? War, destruction, pain, agony, depression, death. Alright, now we're covered. To be honest, you might like this one. All of its paintings are incredibly dark and sad, and depression is a very common thing in our society, which is not something to be proud of. Anyway, I'm going to be teaching you about German Expressionism. Though maybe something you haven't really heard of, it's something that you've definitely seen before, like a lot, which makes it apparent that it's a legacy and it still exists today. It can be random TV shows, images from your local art museum. It's shown in SpongeBob.
If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, then who was flickering the lights? Nosferatu!
Pretty much all of the horror genre is just giving all of its credit to German Expressionism. We all know that one chick and she's like running away from the killer and she just hides in a closet or a place that she's very easily found, and you're just like, stop it. You can thank German Expressionism for that one. Movies like Silence of the Lamb and Don't Breathe, they both portray expressionist techniques. That's because of the creepy and the eerie settings and the shadows. They were first made in that era, and fortunately they are still seen today. Except now it's like creepy demons flying down and stuff like that, when we did not have that technology during World War I. Regardless, this is an influence that you've seen, whether it be the beauty of it, like the paintings, or the pain, which is basically what's behind it. This movement built a foundation in both the art industry, film industry, dancing, architecture, pretty much every industry related to the art field. You might know of the occult classic Psycho. If you don't, you probably should watch it. I haven't watched it. It was made in 1960, and there's a character, and his name is Norman, and you can see him through the shower curtains, but you just see the shadow. And that's a scene that's very similar to Nosferatu, which is that creepy-looking vampire thing that we saw earlier in SpongeBob. Both films use a ton of symbolism. That was very popular during German Expressionism times because no one likes to actually say what they mean. Even in 1992, Tim Burton, which we know made Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline and all those other creepy movies, he created The Batman Returns, and you can see a ton of different hints of German Expressionism. But I digress. You're probably wondering what even is this thing that she's talking about. Well, I'm glad you asked, random high school student that's just desperate to learn more about various art movements. Expressionism was much more than an art style. It was an expression of people's feelings. Hence the name. It was towards a tragic war that was coming. It took inspiration from the avant-garde movement and explored the darker side of it and the darker side of life. At the spark of World War I, the tone of paintings changed from this beautiful and very happy and materialistic to very anti-military and all those themes I said before. Death, destruction, sadness. You get the idea. In a country that was so monopolized by their government, sometimes their only outlet was art. It's like therapy, except a lot of nude paintings. A lot. However, don't be mistaken with Fauvism. That was a much happier movement, and it happened way before German Expressionism, like an entire century ago. Well, whatever. Though, Expressionists did dip their toes into that art style. Both use very vibrant colors and beautiful symbolism, but Fauvism is sweet. Expressionist is not. Basically, look at it this way. In the eyes of the Fauvs, they saw yellow as this pretty, beautiful, happy color, and German Expressionism saw that as, illness. Fun bunch of people, am I right? Also, Expressionists like to use two colors that were supposed to be opposite on the color wheel, and they would kind of like morph them together into one painting. It's supposed to make the audience uncomfortable when they view it because it doesn't really complement each other and it doesn't blend. We see these paintings in stuff like Scream, which I'm sure you have seen before in your lifetime if you've been to any art class ever or any art museum. There's the creepy looking dude in the corner, he's screaming. And the colors are morphed together, and there's this blue and this orange, and it just looks really wrong. And it makes you uncomfortable to look at, because you're like, the sky shouldn't be that way. Why is his face looking like that? Anxiety. But why, might you ask? Why were German Expressionists feeling this way? Think back to any history textbook that you saw ever. During the era of World War I, you heard about how Germans were being treated. They were in isolation, and the German Expressionists wanted to tear down their new corrupt government, and they felt that they could only do so by expressing social injustice. To achieve their goals, they showed more personal subjects, like homosexuality, which was a felony. And Expressionists felt that creating paintings based on this were like teeny tiny little wins that would help state their rights. According to Roy F. Allen, which is the author of Literary Life in German Expressionism, idiosyncrasies were not tolerated, and thus discussion of profoundly personal questions, like religion or sexuality, was taboo. In these pieces, there were many underlying themes of angst or open sexuality, hence all the nude paintings. I mean, you had happy nudes, you had sad nudes, and they're all weird shapes, and they're all colorful. Throughout this movement, you see the development of the beginning of the war until the end. Throughout that entire time is a very depressing period. The Expressionists shaped the foundation of paintings, architecture, dance, sculptures, and film. It blossomed in Berlin during the First World War. The reason that this movement is so fixated on Germany is due to the fact that they were in confinement. Though other countries experiencing the wars did experience it in different ways, Germany had a unique way of expressing themselves. In nudity. Before they knew it, their country was being torn to pieces. In 1916, all of the foreign films were banned in Germany. By 1917, the German military commander took control of all of Germany's major film studios. They then merged them all together into one called UFA. UFA. After this, Germany could only produce nationalist films. Those who were trying to escape fascism would head over to different areas like London, and they would take their techniques with them. Though this did benefit them in the future because that's how Germany got its name out there for all of their international films. Due to the backlash of the war, wonderful movies were created that you probably hear of today, maybe not. The most popular one would be The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. This basically shaped the rest of the foundation of German films due to the popularity and success of it. It kind of put pressure on other movies. I mean, it was good, but apparently it was revolutionary. Not only was it a hit in Germany, but it soon began to spread to Europe and eventually the US. People had never seen anything like it before. The shadows in this film took ominous presence of their own, which we later see in other films like Nosferatu. Creepy vampire thing. It featured characters with exaggerated makeup and costumes, and the main characters were the villains, which was uncommon and kind of still is. The director, Robert Wien, of Caligari used angles and geometric forms just to show the contrast between the light and the dark. They also used mirrors and windows for reflections and incredibly complex architectural sets. Basically, TLDR, in the film, two guys go to a carnival where they meet this creepy looking doctor and a guy that's hypnotized that can allegedly predict the future. He then predicts that one of the two dudes is gonna die. They then do. Not a spoiler, it's in the description of the movie. It was very creepy apparently for its time and also very ahead of its time, and made in 1921, so don't laugh at the visuals. It's revolutionary and it's trying. Expressionists created new techniques that the world hadn't even ever heard before, like film noir, though it would have never happened without the explorations of the juxtapositioning of light and shadow. Film noir is most known for the magnificent visuals and the atmosphere. Its exact definition is a style or genre of cinematographic, however you say that word, film, marked by a mood of pessimism, fatalism, and menace. In film noir, there is a heavy use of shadows to portray a more gloomy view of the world. In these films, there are usually characters that have very complex stories and a lot of motifs. If you don't know what motifs are, pay attention to your English class. They talk about it about 100 times, but basically it's just a reoccurring thing that happens, and it's like a symbol. In movies, Expressionists had many directors, cameramen, and lighting techniques. These techniques were trying to bring new concepts to the story. F.W. Murnau created a film called The Last Laugh. In this, he used something called the unchained camera, which is kind of revolutionary. It's a camera that never stops moving. This technique was created so that the audience viewing the movie could kind of feel what the characters were feeling. It was an emotional connection that people didn't really have with any other film like that before. Filmmakers also created mise en scène, which rhymes. It's the arrangement of things that appear in front of the camera. So basically it's all the physical things in a shot, like my shirt, my hair, me, you get the point. It's just people, sets, props, costumes, actors, lighting, everything. Sometimes directors wanted to use that and kind of play on it by making everything abstract or distorted, artificial. They wanted to throw the entire film off balance. Basically, in both paintings and film, the use of light and odd angles affected the mood. It was different than what the other countries were experiencing, how the war was going on around them. These artists saw something that no one else around them saw in such depth detail, which is heavy fascism. They believed that literature could have profound changes in a society, and that's exactly what they strive for. Despite the agony of the war, it did create long-lasting friendships. Sort of. Groups like Bruk, meaning bridge, which basically started Expressionism, and Der Blau Ritter formed together to create beautiful art pieces that would last a lifetime, though Bruk works were only from 1905 to 1913, and Der Blau Ritter kind of dissolved after World War I. Regardless, they formed together in a time of pain and made beautiful pieces that the outside world would not be able to understand, though you will hear more about these groups later. Post-war years of the war, from 1919 to 1929, were called the Weimar period in film history. With that being said, once the war ended, the film and paintings that the Expressionists had created had been let out for the rest of the world to see. This then inspired other filmmakers and artists who would interpret the pieces in their own way and incorporate them into their own art. This then spread on for many years to come. Though we are very lucky to have some evidence from the movement, many pieces were rejected and then destroyed. Publications were serial printed on paper, so they were eventually burned or destroyed. A famous painter, Franz Marc, was condemned as a degenerate by Nazis. They removed over 130 pieces of his work from public collections. This was happening everywhere, and it was nearly impossible to stop it. The Expressionist movement became much bigger than just Germany, but it was built on the foundation of the German Empire.
Hello everyone, so today I'm going to be painting an Expressionist painting while talking to you all about Expressionism. So Expressionism was founded in 1905 by a group of 4 German artists, and it was led by Ernest Ludwig Kirchner. For my first color, I'm going to be going in with some yellow. And I decided to start off this painting with yellow because there's something really interesting about the color yellow within Expressionism. You all probably know that yellow is a color that is associated with happiness, joy, summer, just bright, good feelings. And something that's really interesting about Expressionism is they really changed the meaning of yellow within their paintings. They thought it should resemble something such as sickness. All Expressionist paintings are really dark and kind of depressing just because they were really trying to illustrate how they felt and how they felt the world was. Expressionism really happened after the war, and the war really changed how the world worked. It was no longer this safe place, they felt. There was just so much anxiety and trauma and stress, and it just felt different. So they wanted to capture that within their art. Color plays a huge role within Expressionism. Each color means something. There is not a color that doesn't mean something. Something that they also did with color is they often paired colors together that weren't pleasing to the eye, so it would cause actually physical discomfort for the viewer. And I think that's really cool. You can actually see that within the famous painting, The Scream, which is an Expressionist painting. The blues and orange, it just gives a weird feeling. So the next color I'm probably going to go in with is blue. So you're probably wondering why I have such big globs of blue on my paper. Expressionists often used a lot of paint, so they got this really good texture. It tends to be like highly textured as well. I honestly think it could be thought of as this is how they feel like the world is kind of weighing down on them. Some techniques they also did within paintings is they often used swirling and swaying. And I'll probably do that with a different color so it can turn up more. A really great painting by an Expressionist artist is Emil Nold. He was a German Expressionist artist, and one of my favorite paintings by him is called The Mask. I think it's a really good example of Expressionism, just because he uses all these colors, and the faces of the masks are just kind of creepy, and they give off just this weird vibe. Emil Nold was a very influential Expressionist. Some fun facts about him is that he supported the Nazi Party, but they did not support him. Nazi Germany actually declared his pieces were like not German. They thought that it wasn't traditional enough for them, so they banned his paintings. And he was actually not allowed to paint. So I found that quite interesting, just because I guess he was a big supporter of the Nazi Party. Something that is also cool about Expressionist paintings is that they are not realistic at all. It's really based off of feelings and trying to illustrate, the horrors of humanity. The whole point is not to be pretty, these paintings aren't to be, they have meaning, They're not just something to look at. And I think that's what's really important about them. So what I'm trying to illustrate within this painting is I'm using a lot of cool tones. And there's a lot of swirling. And I just kind of want it to look a little bit like it's overwhelming this person. And the yellow here. And I made him yellow also to resemble how sick he is. His mindset. Or maybe the world has plagued him. Expressionists often encourage distortion of forms and the development of bold colors in order to convey their message and feelings to the viewer. Why does this matter? Why is it so important to art, and why is it so important to talk about now? I think it's important because it does show our past. It really shows how these people at the time felt with everything, and I guess it's a way to step in the shoes of the artists. And they really tried to show us how their modern world had drastically changed. And they wanted to change everything through their art, you know. And they kind of did. They did change a lot. Like I said about the color yellow, that was very interesting to learn that they wanted to make a whole new meaning to everything. They changed how people viewed art as well. You know, it wasn't just this, oh, if it's not beautiful, then what's the point? It wasn't about aesthetically pleasing pieces anymore. It was about, what does this mean, and how does it apply to me? How does it apply to this world? It was just more than looking good. It was more about them making just the piece. It was about connecting the viewer to it. The whole point was they wanted to excite people and make them think. I think it's important to still learn about what Expressionists did and still analyze their paintings, because I think a lot of it does still apply to what we're going through now. I mean, we live in a very unsafe time, a very violent time, and that is what Expressionism showed throughout their pieces. They showed the horrors of humanity and humans. They showed our flaws, and I thought that was really interesting, because a lot of art, at least when it first was happening, it was really to show the beauty of human life and the human form. And I think it's really interesting about how negative Expressionism is and how it shows our flaws. And it's not, and a lot of people feel like Expressionism is an attack on humanity, but I really feel like it is a way to improve humanity. I think that is their message, is they wanted to show us our flaws and show what we're doing, but in a way so we can look at it and improve ourselves. They were real. They weren't lying about how everything is okay. They wanted to be raw and upfront, no matter how uncomfortable it made people. And there we have it. I know it didn't really do Expressionism justice. The paintings they create are very interesting. I hope it continues. So, here's my painting. It is a person that is completely surrounded by the negativity of life. So I hope you enjoyed my painting, and I hope you learned some things about Expressionism. And yeah, so we are going to now talk about the painters themselves and the works that they did that are far better than this. So yeah.
There are many key artists of German Expressionism. The main ones that heavily impacted the movement include Franz Marc, Henry Rousseau, Edvard Munch, Emily Nold, and Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. We're going to focus on Franz Marc, Edvard Munch, and Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. Franz Marc was born in 1880 in Germany. During his childhood, he had influence from his father, who worked as a landscape painter. In 1910, he was enrolled in the Academy of Art, where he was exposed to the Jugendstil art movement. This movement emphasized the use of expressive lines to depict natural structures and forms. It also inspired him to pull away from the confines of naturalism, which were taught in the academy. In 1903, Marc met French artist Jean Nistel in Paris, who was famous for painting animals. This sparked Marc to begin painting animals as well. Marc also found interest in the flaws. They used vibrant and distorted colors and also depicted the relationship between man and nature, which was very important to Mark as well. He began to study the anatomy of animals and began to visit the Berlin Zoo frequently. He thought that animals were perfect for depicting truth, purity, and beauty. Colors were also very important to Mark. He knew they strongly affected mood and came up with a theory of symbolism for them. This was much influenced by Van Gogh's emotional use of color. Mark associated blue with masculinity, yellow with the feminine, and red with violence. This is evidenced in his piece called The Yellow Cow. The yellow color of the cow represents the feminine because Mark saw yellow as provoking feminine emotions. The blue spots then represent the masculine, and the merging of these two colors represent Mark's second marriage and the safety that he felt in it. His work also embodies the anxieties of early 20th century Europe as the people struggled with a rapidly changing urban world and also the war. His goal was to use symbolism as a tool to overcome the toxic state of the modern world, which he viewed very unfavorably. He believed that civilization destroys human awareness of the spiritual force of nature. Another one of Mark's famous pieces is called Tiger. The strength of the tiger is represented by the intersecting shards of colors and the acute angles. The black outline also adds emphasis to this as well. And there's a sense of violence in this painting, which contrasts with the peacefulness found in Mark's earlier paintings, such as The Yellow Cow. His work during this time became more dark, and he also began to see animals as almost impure as human beings. And his use of cubic techniques allowed him to create this feeling of tension found in the piece. Another one of his darker paintings is Fate of the Animals. The sharp angles express Mark's view on the relationship between man and nature, and it also kind of represents his fear of the war and shows the world being torn apart. As you can see, the animals are conveyed as panicked. However, despite all the chaos of the piece, the blue deer that's found in the center of the piece shows that Mark did have some hope for the future. Along with his friend Kandinsky, he founded the Blue Rider Group, and they emphasized the use of bold colors and abstracted forms. Their goal was to use symbolism as a tool to overcome the toxic state of the world. However, the group was short-lived because Mark was drafted into service and the Russian members of the group returned home, so it just fizzled out. Expressionism is known for its interest in spirituality and use of abstraction, and Mark used his love for animals to create a vision of the world as seen through the eyes of them. His use of lines and symbolic use of color had a lasting effect on the Expressionist movement. He died in battle at the age of 27. He had a brief career, but his works lived on to influence other artists. The next artist is Edvard Munch. He was born in Norway in 1863. He had a childhood full of tragedy, including the deaths of his mother and his sister. And he was raised by his father, who struggled very much with mental illness, and this impacted the way he grew up. And you can see this because many themes of his work include anxiety, emotional suffering, and human vulnerability. He was very much influenced by the symbolism art movement. And this is evident because he focused on the internal aspect of the subject instead of the exterior. And he said, nature is not only all that is visible to the eye, it also includes the inner pictures of the soul. He formed a close relationship with Hans Jaeger, who encouraged him to draw from more personal experience in his work. His piece, The Sick Child, served as a memorial to his dead sister and clearly shows the influence that he had on Munch. This piece was considered a breakthrough for him because it set the tone of his works to be more dark and characterized by death, loss, anxiety, and madness. And the rough brush strokes and the scratched surface also contribute to his personal experience that he was feeling. He used intense color, semi-abstraction, other characteristics of Expressionism to evoke the viewer's own psychological or emotional condition. And darker emotions were also depicted by contrasting lines, darker colors, blocks of colors, and somber tones. Similar to Van Gogh, he strove to make a connection to the subject as observed in the world around him and his own psychological or emotional perception. One of the most famous paintings of him is The Scream. It reveals an honest yet ugly look into his inner struggle and anxieties. He put more importance into personal meaning and connection rather than beauty, which was a traditional goal of art. He wrote, "As I was walking down the road with two friends when the sun set, suddenly the sky turned red as blood. I stopped and leaned against the fence, shivering with fear. Then I heard the enormous infinite scream of nature." And this gives us a look inside his struggle with anxiety, and as you can see the friends in the background, they continued to walk on without him, which kind of gives a sense to the loneliness he was feeling. And like most expressionists, he used vibrant colors in this piece and many more to create a chaotic emotional state. And the difference between the oranges and the blue, they don't really go together, and that makes us feel uneasy, and that's what he was trying to do with this piece. He had a lasting impact on artists such as Kirchner, Kandinsky, Beckmann, and others who were concerned with expressing individual psychology. He also influenced movements such as Surrealism, Fauvism, and Symbolism, and he passed away in 1944. Another key artist is Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. He was born in 1880 in Bavaria. He was motivated by the same anxieties that the rest of the Expressionists shared, but he also had conflicting attitudes about the past and the present. Him and a couple other friends founded the artist group called The Bridge, and the goal of this group was to create a new mood of artist expression. They used crude lines and vibrant and unnatural colors to express deep emotions. One of his paintings is called Marzella, and it is a provocative depiction of a young prepubescent girl. And the techniques that are used in this piece reflect those of The Bridge. He used unnatural colors and the self-conscious body language that the girl is giving off kind of make this piece give off an uneasy feeling, and they believe this process allowed them to capture the soul of the subject. And another one of his famous pieces is called Self-Portrait as a Soldier, and it expresses the distress he experienced during his service in the war. And he has a severed right hand, and this also symbolizes the trauma that he experienced. And he started to turn his attention away from the female nude and more towards German life, and his work captures German culture and pre-World War history. And many attempt to copy his distorted sense of perspective, and this can be seen in his piece called Street Berlin. The luxury of the people and the anxious energy the piece gives off gives an example of how he portrayed German culture in his work. And the men walking down the street have angular, mask-like faces, kind of that distorted perspective. And he also painted the people in these crowds with bold brushstrokes, and he died in 1938. Overall, the public reaction to Expressionism was mostly confusion. The people and many conservative artists did not understand the use of bright colors, flattened shapes, and distortion. A lot believed it seemed un-German and too French. And the Nazi regime was particularly against this movement, and they wanted it gone. And after that, these artists were viewed as degenerate and were forced into exile. World War I and the political issues in Germany that followed seemed to be the reason for this movement, and its fate was determined by the social disorder it attempted to deal with.